before we begin, I would just like to introduce Vaishnavi for all the viewers who are watching this. Vaishnavi is the founder and principal of Vainam Strategies, advising companies and civil societies on how to build safer, more age-appropriate experiences for young people. She's an expert in online safety and privacy, age-appropriate design, policy development and enforcement, and product guidance. Thank you, Vaishnavi, once again, and I welcome you on Trust and Safety Talks.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. So, since we are having this conversation with the like-minded experts working on trust and safety globally, and we're trying to understand that how do you feel that trust and safety is important in today's time when a lot of companies, tech companies are kind of emerging into this space and are speaking a lot. Global discussions are happening. So I would like to have this conversation with you, with your thoughts. And I would like to begin by asking your journey in trust and safety space and how it has grown globally today.
Sure. I mean, I actually started my career at Disney as an Imagineer. My job was to support our international park expansions. And at Disney, I was just blown away by how seriously the company took the guest experience. You know, they were thinking about ways to improve every aspect of a child's experience that I couldn't even imagine. That was my first job out of college. And I couldn't believe that there was this much thought and care that was going into the process. And it got me really interested in how to apply this to other industries. And that's when I moved to Google. I grew up in Asia, and so this was a great opportunity to shape the online safety of children in Asia, in the Asia Pacific region. And I worked there on child safety and privacy public policy. And so I really worked with experts in the region, with governments, helping learning and helping them understand what the landscape of online child safety was looking like. And then from there, I moved to Twitter, and that's where I met some members of your team. You guys were really great partners to Twitter, I guess now X. And I moved there to be their head of safety for the Asia Pacific region. And then eventually, I moved to the US to take on a global role. And I found myself moving to Instagram to be their first head of safety and well-being policy. They hadn't had a head like that before. And at the time, the broader company, Meta, hadn't formally announced any broad youth strategy. But as the company started focusing more on youth and more publicly as well, my role expanded. And so at my last role, I was the head of youth policy across Meta, where my team and I worked on creating age-appropriate content and product policies across a range of the Meta apps.
That's fantastic to know that you have worked across all tech companies, largely all the big tech companies to say, also in the policy front. That's amazing to hear from you.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I have done this for so long. And when I left Meta, I was trying to decide if I wanted to do, yet another role like that again. But after having done it from within companies for so long, I think I decided that the most impact I could make was by actually helping smaller companies and mid-sized startups, civil society, government, folks who don't have the same resources to hire full-time youth-focused people, but who are catering to and building for young people, and so need that kind of advice. And so that's when I decided to set up VYS, and it's been really interesting so far. It's new, but it's been really interesting so far.
That's interesting for us to know that you have set up your own company to talk about youth and policy over there. So the intervention is over there. And delighted to know that you have extensively worked on youth policy. And having said that, what according to you are some of the challenges that youth face today in the online spaces? How do you foresee policies for youth empowerment and safety in the online spaces? If you can just share a bit about that.
Yeah, I'd say it's both challenges and opportunities because young people are now coming online earlier and they're staying online longer than they historically used to be. The challenge/opportunity there is that the internet wasn't really designed with them in mind. It wasn't really designed with young people in mind. And so we need to challenge some of the long-standing assumptions about how the internet should operate for them. Now, this is particularly exciting right now because we're entering a new era of technologies, from virtual reality to augmented reality to artificial general intelligence. We have the chance to get it right from the outset rather than, later play catch up later on. And so another challenge here, and I think also an opportunity, is that as we're building out the framework for what healthy experiences look like online for young people, we need to remember that everyone has a wide range of rights. And I think sometimes in trust and safety, we talk about trust or safety, but we also really need to talk about privacy, agency, independence. I've seen so many bad youth proposals out there right now to just cut them off from the internet altogether, or make parents surveil them 24/7 and control everything that they do online. We need better. We need to do better around those issues. So I think when it comes to those challenges and opportunities, it's a tightrope because we need to have this deep experience in policy and product development. We need a lot of comfort with gray areas, and we need to be willing to engage with a wide range of stakeholders, from academia to civil society to government. And then I think the final thing I would say there is, and this I think is pretty self-evident, I'm sure you've thought about this, most dominant social media platforms today emerged in the US. And so I think we need to be very honest about how there's been a historical lack of inclusivity in tech, thinking about the global population and their needs. And I think we need to ask companies, policymakers, and civil society to hear directly from young people across a whole range of cultural and socioeconomic backgrounds.
No, totally, I agree with you as well, because the more actors we are involving now is also kind of becoming a troublesome in some ways, if I say, because, and also it is also opening avenues to more discussions as well. So like the coin has two sides, the conversation also has two sides over there.
Yeah.
Though we are trying to put all the responsibility on parents today, for looking after their children, making them more responsible, also somewhere making them more accountable for what is
Yeah.
happening online. So we are shifting that burden on them somehow, that everything that has to be catered by them, but we also kind of uh, leave behind the thoughts that people who are creating content, people who are designing policies, people who are bringing these opportunities for young minds to explore, aren't they responsible somewhere? So safety by design, we talk about it, like when it comes to
Yeah.
product safety, so creating those, or making those products, how is that tech companies are looking after their products? So
Yeah.
in and all, everybody is somewhere or the other responsible for what is happening in the online spaces, from creating content to regulating content. So, and also
Absolutely.
you talked about, augmented realities. Now, generative AI is there. A lot of conversations is happening around that.
Mhm.
Policies are being designed. A lot of discussions are happening globally. So, how do you envision generative AI when it is regarding youth safety online? What policy frameworks are needed to mitigate potential risk? If you can draw your attention on that.
Yeah, we talk about the need to think about the policy frameworks, but generative AI is exponentially accelerating those conversations, and really the whole concept of artificial general intelligence. It's really accelerating conversations around what does responsible and inclusive technology look like for young people. So that can range from issues like, what are the data collection practices? How do you mitigate bias in the way you design your models? Are you really designing your models with the inputs of all young people in mind, or just a particular segment of young people? How do you moderate the interaction outputs? So, young people are really curious and they're engaging with models. What do you do when you know that a young person is asking a series of increasingly risky questions to a model? How do you actually respond to that as the maker of that model, in terms of the answers you give, the resources you provide, the experience that you create for that young person? That's, I think, incredibly important. And On our side, we're closely tracking these developments, and we're working very closely with companies, civil society, government around what this future-proof, innovative tech policy can look like. And a couple of things that have come up in those discussions is number one, we have a huge need for transparency. Um, if you look at the way we identify bias or vulnerabilities in large models today, we're already seeing that red teamers have to spend a significant amount of time just replicating those large language models to identify bias or vulnerabilities, because companies don't, in a structured way, provide them with that information. And that's not sustainable. I think today the global regulatory muscle is much stronger. I think if we don't see more transparency coming out of large vendors soon, that decision will be made for them. And then the final piece is we need to be building product and policy decisions that are explainable to everybody, including young people. If your guidelines or your product frameworks are not easily understandable, then A, you lose public trust, which then increases the specter of regulation. And B, you have government stepping in to regulate what you're going to be doing. And it's not necessarily always good regulation, right? We talked a little earlier about proposal to just cut people off from the internet altogether, or just transfer surveillance over to parents. And frankly, that's so impractical. If as a parent supposed to spend their full day monitoring 10, 12 different apps your kids are using and keeping up to date on all of them, training them. It's really impractical in markets like Asia or in India, where kids are far more digitally savvy than their parents. They're definitely not going to be in a position to monitor their kids then. So I think regulation is coming. It's already here. We've seen more regulation passed around uh, artificial general intelligence in the last few years. That's much faster than it came about for social media or internet platforms. So we need to kind of quickly build to address those issues.
No, totally. I second your thought as well, because when you talk about transparency, especially in the Asian market, if I talk about India specifically, that
Yeah.
trust, there is a lack of trust between the generations when it comes to usage of online spaces. Though there are safety tools, though big tech companies are working upon that, but that lack of trust, when I say, is because parents, when they see online spaces, they believe that, we don't know what our children are doing online. And children, on the other hand, they also don't want to share what they're doing online. So there are filtrations while they speak about what they're doing online. They only talk about the safe aspects of it. But if anything goes wrong, they look for solutions. And solutions out there are not readily available when it comes to stakeholders. So, like, in some way, like, being transparent is good, but then you need to have adequate resources for that. And having said that, and drawing from that, I believe that, we need to have some kind of an approach, a balanced approach, for innovation and also, engagement. So what do you feel with that? What are the what that young users can do to protect themselves from potential harms or inappropriate content today?
Well, I think young users can take a number of measures, including being more aware of a company's policies, looking through product guides to understand how those products are working. But the reality is that most people, and not just young people, most of us don't read a company's policies or look into the support tools a company has until we really need it, until we're in a moment of crisis. So I think there's something there. I think there's more work that companies can do to surface those resources in a moment of crisis. So if you've just reported an instance of abuse, companies should be able to say, well, we know that you feel you've been through something abusive. Here are the resources that you may want to consider, and make that really accessible. I think other things young people can do are also of course, talk to their parents, but talk to the broader community. I've been really amazed by the generation of youth activists that are coming up now who grew up online and are speaking very openly about the experiences they had online, what they struggled with, how it made them feel. The internet, social media is not going to be, the single source of harm. We live in a complex, multifaceted society, but we have not spent enough time understanding the impact of the internet, I think, on young people. And then finally, I think I would reframe this a little and say, what can companies do here? Because I'm a little bit of an optimist. I dream of a tech future where designing for young people is seen as a gift, not as a blocker. There's so much innovation that's possible when you're building tech in a responsible way. It's such an exciting opportunity for growth. It's not this obstacle to moving fast and breaking things. It's actually an enormous incentive to be more creative from an engineering product perspective. I've really been appreciating some of the newer companies that I work with who are genuinely excited to build in a responsible way. They've seen what irresponsible product development has looked like, and they're like, we're not like that. We don't want to be in that category. So I think there's more that companies can do there and, tap on the expertise of the community around you.
Oh, that's brilliant. That newer companies, smaller companies are thinking about that. That also excites us. Basically, we are also looking for how new companies are trying to shape these products, making into more safety designs. And that brings me to ask you that, how do you see interdisciplinary collaboration between experts in child safety, technology, policy, and media literacy contribute to a more comprehensive approach to safeguard youth online?
I think it's a great question because, the honest answer is that historically, only big companies could afford to do that. Only a company that is extremely well resourced could say, yes, we will bring in our experts in child safety, technology, policy, media literacy. We will have teams within that will then synthesize all of their inputs, and then we'll come up with recommendations. That is not something that's accessible to most companies. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to start VYS, right? To be able to do this with smaller companies. So I think you need to have folks that act as translators. And so that's how I describe our work. I'm like, we're translators. We'll take the insights from all these great multi-stakeholder organizations, and we'll translate that into actual like product requirements, engineering requirements, policies that we can actually write and develop. What I think can be really useful here from a regulatory perspective is this idea of a regulatory sandbox. And we're actually seeing some of this happen now with AI. I believe Spain has introduced a regulatory sandbox where government, civil society, companies, industry can work together in a protected environment to develop solutions that are going to be beneficial for the ethical use of AI. And I love that model. I'd love to see that play out more. I think governments or agencies can play this really good convening role in bringing folks together, because then that way it's also more accessible, right? It's not just a FANG company that can afford to do it. Any company can be involved in the sandbox and gain these insights. So I think that's another way in which we can foster interdisciplinary collaboration.
No, that's pretty interesting. That of course, I also read some piece about Sandbox, so
Yeah.
that's interesting because that's bringing multi-stakeholders on a platform where they look into all the interventions that can cater to safety of users online, especially when it comes to youth safety. So I think that's going to be a really fantastic approach. And also, when we talk about youth, I feel that one of the prime issues, along with safety, is coming with misleading content, right?
Mm.
They are being misguided with some content that is being created, that is being disseminated, or I would say that is being spread across. So that brings me to the focus of misinformation, right?
Mhm.
So also now, largely above 62 or 65 countries are going for elections this year. And that's a major stake. 2024 is seen as a big year for globally. And fake news is one of the most common discussions amongst youth. And recently, we also conducted a research and got a good attention from approx 6K youth from India talking about fake news and misinformation. And we'll be releasing the report early, like later this month. So we believe that how misinformation is shaping youth ideology, also their decision making. So what do you think that how can age appropriate design principles be utilized to mitigate the spread of fake news and misinformation from younger demographics who may be more susceptible to manipulation? I know there are a lot of thoughts running around, but want to hear your thoughts on this.
I think misinformation is a really challenging space. And, there are so many incredible experts out there focusing on this. When I think about it in the context of young people and age-appropriate design, one of the key principles of age-appropriate design is that you have to switch off by default, any option that uses profiling. So anything that personalizes the content that you're receiving, unless you can demonstrate a very compelling reason for why profiling should be on. And this is an environment in which misinformation thrives. Misinformation is really appealing when it dovetails with your pre-existing notions, when it dovetails with your pre-existing interests. So in a world where we can personalize content and surface it to young people, we are also creating an environment where misinformation can thrive very freely. Now, there's good reasons to profile. I mean, in some situations, it delivers valuable information to young people. It makes their experience online feel more personal and relevant. But in the context of misinformation, because it thrives on being instinctively appealing to someone, and as a child, if you're developing a certain point of view, personalized recommendations could result in that misinfo being surfaced to you. Another principle of age-appropriate design that I think can be interesting here is the idea of transparency, which is not just sharing what you're doing with young people, but providing very bite-sized explanations about what your policies and standards are, how you're using their personal data, and so on. And I think that really gives them the tools to understand why they're seeing certain types of information, which can be a very good tool in battling misleading content when they come across it.
No, certainly. I also think a lot of times that, how can tech policies or big platforms become more transparent with the usage of data that they take from users while even registering them on any platform. So what is that they are doing with data over there? Because we see a lot of data breaches many a times, especially in
Mm.
India, through telecoms, receiving random calls or anybody calling you randomly. So somewhere there is a breach in data. So it's
Mhm.
good to have those transparency when you're using anybody data of any individual or
Yeah.
any certain group, how you're targeting that, what is that you are safeguarding a user over there if you're giving out anybody's data. So any compliances over there, transparency policies over there. So that needs to be stated very outrightly, even on their platforms, and they should encourage people to talk about it more. So that approach should be taken by them, I believe, somewhere. And
Yeah.
though they have policies, but more discussions, I feel, will help people know about what is that level of transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, when it comes and when we talk about data, a really important principle with young people is data minimization, making sure that you retain their data for periods of time that are appropriate, and you justify why you're retaining that data. This is the kind of work that can really prevent breaches of data leading to unfortunate consequences. And it's relevant for everybody. It's relevant for even adults. But I think in the case of young people, of course, we want to give them a higher level of protection. And so it's all the more important that we enforce this for them and make sure that we're minimizing the data we collect for them. I have been really amazed by, in the last 4 years, there's been more regulation to protect young people online than there has been in the 15 years that preceded that. And we've seen some real changes. I think I'd say now that most large companies don't no longer advertise customized to children based on personalized recommendations. And that's a direct result of regulation. And so I think there's a world in where we can formalize and institutionalize some of these principles so that everybody knows what is and is not okay when it comes to treating or using the data of young people.
Yeah, totally, totally, totally. And would you like to share about any specific youth policy that is out and well out there globally that they can refer to, they can that they should know about, something that you want to highlight upon?
Yeah, there's when I think of youth policy, I think of some of the regulations, but I also think of some of the decisions companies have made.
Mm.
So, with regulations, I think the Children's Code in the UK, which used to be the Age Appropriate Design Code, is a great starting point for people to think about. The Digital Services Act, as it came into place, has made a number of has made companies take a number of changes when it comes to profiling young people. But then I think about what companies have done, and there's been some interesting changes there. Google, well, slash YouTube recently announced that they were no longer going to recommend repeated pieces of content that focused on comparing physical features or fitness levels or social aggression. And I think they did this in collaboration with families as well as their advisory committee. And that was a really good thought out process. You can agree or disagree with the policy, but I think the process that they undertook was really valuable. Other companies have announced changes like limiting recommendations around certain topics, turning off messaging from strangers by default. Again, this is all really in the last 3 to 4 years. It's a very heady, exciting time to be working on youth issues, especially compared to like the 15 years previously, where we were begging companies and governments to do something. Everyone's doing something now.
And I think so post-COVID, things have changed a lot because largely internet was consumed by all age groups.
Yeah.
So more policy recommendations have come around that period of time, uh,
Yeah.
because it was well understood that, how technology is shaping individual lives across the
Well,
globe.
yeah, and just to add to that, I think if you look at India, for example, with COVID, I think about 70% of urban households in India that had internet connectivity didn't receive any education during this time. So that means that these, kids who were online were not studying. They were online engaging in all these other activities, a lot of which is great, a lot of which is really good and fun and community building, but some aspect of which is dangerous. And I think I agree. I think that COVID period was a real testing. It really tested kind of the extent to which internet usage can be positive and negative and what that means for us as a society.
No, totally. When you mention lack of education, because a lot of parents and educators, they approached us that we are finding it really challenging, though they are equipped with internet on their phones, but to use certain application was really hard for them. And also to monitor what kids are doing online, because children would have innovative ideas to tease educators over there, teachers over there online. So those were
Yeah.
some of the trends that had come up, and a lot of teachers, middle-aged teachers, they were finding it really hard to tackle this issue. So that is why they wanted the schools to reopen, go back to schools, teach them with their old methodologies as well.
Yeah.
So we should not miss on that. While we are advancing with technology, we understand that lack of education around technology should also be bridged. But having said that, some people really don't like to be online many times. They don't want to get that equipped. So, which
Yeah.
is fine, which is totally fine.
That's totally
It should be
fine.
more
I mean, we
individual
can make it more
choice.
accessible to them, like we got to make it more appealing, like more intuitive. Like, yeah, that's fair.
It is becoming more essential as well because somehow even scams are just increasing. Even not doing anything, you get trapped in any sort of a scam. So that little awareness or literacy around it is becoming more essential now in today's time.
Hmm.
So With that, I want to ask you one very last question about how do you see trust and safety as an industry for youth, and what key tips that you would like to share with them? So, something that you want to inspire more youth to join this industry or have that knowledge bank about it.
Yes, please join the industry. We cannot have, like, we are going to age out of this industry very soon. And by what I mean by that is that yes, we will have the research and we'll have the academics and we'll have, the people who've worked at companies for a long time, like myself, but we will not have the lived experience of a young person online. I grew up without the internet until I was 10 years old. That is unimaginable today from most young people. We need them to come into the space. And also, I think to the industry, we talk a lot about incorporating youth voices, hearing from youth. I spoke to a youth activist the other day that just said, like, why can't I run things? Like, why do I have to be like an additional voice in the room? Why can't I be leading the conversation? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Why shouldn't you be leading the conversation? If you have the best idea of like what issues are out there, right? So I'd say definitely join the industry. I also will say there's a lot more ways to be involved now. So you could work, of course, you could work like within tech. Great. You could work within a company. You could do your own advising. You could be an activist. You could work within government. There's several areas of society. You could work in social work and provide, evidence-based research and support for other young people online. I think there's a number of ways to get involved. And what I would recommend is to think about how trust and safety plays into all of that, because it does. It plays a role regardless of which of these roles you take on. And so, yeah, I think it's an exciting time to join the space.
No, totally, totally. More youth, we need you in this space. Please, please join. If you are into policies, if you want to learn more about it, Vaishnavi is there, one of the leaders in this space. She can guide you really well. So thank you, Vaishnavi. Thank you for your time. And we really enjoyed having this conversation with you, and hope that many youth who will be watching this video benefit from it.
Thank you. This was great. Thanks so much.